Nobody talks about the weight. Not the weight of empty pockets or unpaid bills, though that's real too. The weight I mean is the one you carry inside. The one that doesn't disappear even when the money gets a little better. The one that follows you into rooms where you're supposed to feel like you belong and whispers that you don't. You've worked hard, maybe harder than anyone around you, and yet there's this invisible ceiling, not above your bank account, but above your sense of self. And that's the part nobody talks about. Let's start there. There's a version of the poverty conversation that gets told all the time. It talks about systemic barriers, about lack of access, about broken institutions. And those things are real. But there's another layer, one that lives beneath policy and economics, that almost never gets addressed. A psychological layer. And if you've lived it, you already feel what I'm describing. It's the way poverty doesn't just take your money. It takes something from the way you see yourself. When you grow up without enough, your brain learns something, not as a conscious lesson, more like a bone-deep inscription. It learns that the world is unpredictable, that safety is temporary, that what you have today might not be there tomorrow. And so you adapt, you become hypervigilant, you become efficient at surviving. But survival and growth are not the same thing. And this is where it gets subtle. Because the very adaptations that keep you alive inside scarcity, the constant scanning for threats, the distrust of stability, the inability to imagine a future that's different from your past, those same adaptations become the invisible walls that make escaping feel impossible. Not because you're not capable, but because your nervous system genuinely cannot tell the difference between the danger that was then and the opportunity that exists now. Think about that for a moment. You're not broken. You're adapted, but you're adapted to a world that's trying to keep you small. And the tragedy is that this adaptation lives inside your self-concept, in the deep, wordless story you carry about who you are and what you deserve. There's something important to understand about how the self-concept forms. It doesn't form in classrooms or through personal choices made in a vacuum. It forms in kitchens where there wasn't enough food on the table. It forms in the moments when a child watches a parent's face tighten under financial pressure and learns, without anyone saying a word, that life is fundamentally dangerous. It forms in the gap between what you needed and what you received. And over time, that gap doesn't just become a memory. It becomes a lens through which every new situation is filtered, including every opportunity. This is the part that's hard to talk about. Because it sounds like an excuse if you say it wrong. It isn't an excuse. It's an explanation. And there's a critical difference between those two things. An excuse lets you stop there. An explanation is the beginning of something. There's a psychologist named Carl Rogers who spent his life studying what it means to become a whole person. He wasn't interested in fixing people. He was interested in what happens when a person finally feels safe enough to stop performing and starts being. He believed that beneath every mask, beneath every defense, every person is moving, however slowly, however painfully, toward growth, toward what he called becoming a fully functioning person. But here's what Rogers also understood, and what most people miss, that movement only becomes possible when a person feels genuinely seen, not judged, not advised. Seen. And poverty, in its cruelest form, makes people feel invisible. Not just to others, but to themselves. If you've spent years being told, implicitly or explicitly, that your circumstances define your worth, that where you come from is what you are, then a part of you begins to believe it. Not because you're weak, because you're human. Because the self-concept is not built in a vacuum. It's built from every reflection the world has ever thrown back at you. And if those reflections have always said, "You are less than, you don't belong here, people like you don't get to dream like that," then the image you carry of yourself starts to match those reflections, even when you know, rationally, that they're wrong. This is what makes poverty a psychological trap, not just an economic one. If this is landing somewhere deep for you, if you're feeling something stir that you've never quite had words for, you might want to stay with this channel, not because we have all the answers, but because this is a space where these questions are taken seriously, where the inner life of a human being is treated as something worth understanding. The trap tightens in a specific way. And it's important to name it clearly. When your self-concept is built around scarcity, when your deepest identity is intertwined with struggle, then any movement away from that identity can feel, unconsciously, like a threat. Not a relief, a threat. Because it means becoming someone unfamiliar, someone you don't quite recognize, someone who might not belong in the world you're moving toward, and no longer fully belongs in the world you came from. Psychologists call this identity dissonance. Rogers might have called it the gap between the self you are and the self you're becoming. Whatever name you give it, the feeling is the same, a strange, nauseating vertigo that comes not from failure, but from success. This is the part nobody warns you about, because we talk a lot about the obstacles outside, the lack of credit, the underfunded schools, the jobs that don't pay enough, and those are real. But the obstacle that stops people who've already cleared every external hurdle, the one that makes them sabotage, retreat, give up at the threshold, is almost always this: the terror of becoming someone their old self doesn't recognize. And so they pull back, not out of laziness, out of loyalty. Loyalty to a version of themselves built for a world that was trying to destroy them. There's something almost sacred in that. Let's go deeper into what that loyalty actually looks like in practice, because it rarely looks like what you'd expect. It looks like a job offer that makes you inexplicably anxious instead of excited. It looks like a relationship with someone stable and kind that somehow feels suffocating. It looks like finishing a degree and then doing nothing with it for years. It looks like money that arrives and disappears without explanation, as if the hands that hold it were never trained to keep it. It looks like being on the verge of something real and finding a way, almost unconsciously, to step away from the edge. People who've never experienced this look from the outside and call it self-sabotage. But that word misses something crucial. Self-sabotage implies malice toward yourself. What's actually happening is something more protective than that. Your inner world is trying to keep you from becoming a stranger to yourself. It's trying to preserve coherence. Even painful coherence feels safer than the disorientation of an unfamiliar self. This is the invisible logic of the poverty trap, and it runs so deep that most people never even know it's operating. There's another layer to this that almost nobody names, and it has to do with the people you love. When you grow up in a community shaped by scarcity, that community becomes part of your identity. Your people, the ones who understand the references, who remember the same streets, who laugh at the same dark jokes about being broke, they are woven into who you are. And moving forward, financially or socially, can feel like an act of betrayal. Not because anyone says it out loud, but because the distance begins to grow, and you feel it in your body before you can articulate it in words. There's a grief in that kind of upward mobility that no one prepares you for. The grief of belonging somewhere less and less. The grief of watching the people you love stay behind, not because they couldn't make it, but because the same invisible walls you're only now beginning to see were always around them too. And sometimes, the kindest, most human thing a person does is stop moving, because the alternative feels like abandonment. Rogers understood something essential about this tension. He spoke about the organism, the whole felt experience of a person, and how it always knows more than the conscious mind admits. When your organism says slow down, I'm not ready, that's not weakness, that's intelligence. The trouble comes when we interpret that signal as evidence that we can't, rather than evidence that we need more time, more support, more understanding of what we're actually moving through. And this is where the conversation around poverty needs to change. Not just in policy rooms, in the room inside yourself. If you're watching this and you've felt any of what I've been describing, if you've ever wondered why your ambition keeps colliding with some force you can't name, I want you to do something small. I want you to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below this video. Tell us one thing you felt but never said out loud about this. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't need a resolution. Just name something, because the moment you name it, it stops being the whole of you and starts being something you're looking at. That's a different relationship. And a different relationship with your inner experience is where everything begins to change. There's one more thing worth sitting with. Rogers said that what human beings need most more than advice, more than solutions, more than someone telling them what to do, is unconditional positive regard, the experience of being accepted fully as they are, not as they could be, not as they should be, as they are. Most people who have grown up in poverty have never had that in a sustained way. They've been conditional their whole lives, accepted when they perform, valued when they produce, loved when they don't need too much. And so they internalize the condition. They become their own most demanding critic. They hold themselves to a standard that isn't about growth. It's about proving that they deserve to exist. That's not ambition. That's survival wearing the mask of ambition. And the work, the real work, is learning to distinguish between the two, not to abandon drive, not to stop wanting, but to begin to want from a different place, from curiosity rather than fear, from expansion rather than desperation. That shift doesn't come from a strategy. It comes from the slow, difficult, deeply human work of learning to be on your own side, not because the world has become safe, but because you have. The moment that shift begins, and it is a moment, even if it's quiet and unremarkable from the outside, something fundamental rearranges itself. The same circumstances that once felt like permanent walls begin to feel like conditions. Difficult conditions, yes. Unjust conditions, often. But conditions are not fate. They're the terrain. And the difference between someone who eventually finds their way through and someone who doesn't is rarely intelligence, talent, or even effort. It's whether they were ever able to experience themselves as someone capable of navigating terrain, rather than someone defined by it. That reframe is not naive. It doesn't ignore history. It doesn't pretend that systemic injustice isn't real or that individual psychology can substitute for structural change. Both are true at once. The system needs to change, and so does the story you've been told about yourself, including the one you've been telling yourself. Because here's what nobody says in the poverty conversation. You were never just a product of your circumstances. Even in the hardest moments, something in you was always more than that. Something was watching, learning, preserving a small flame. You don't have to be grateful for the hardship to acknowledge that the hardship didn't finish you. The poverty trap is real. The systemic barriers are real. The history that lives in the body is real. But so is this. The human capacity to grow, to integrate, to become, even in the face of everything that says otherwise. You are not the sum of what was taken from you. You are also everything that survived it. And maybe that's where it begins, not with a plan, not with a breakthrough, but with a single moment of looking at yourself without judgment and thinking, there is more here than I've been allowed to see. Stay with that, because staying with it is its own form of courage. We live in a culture that worships motion, the next step, the next goal, the next visible sign of progress. And so sitting still with a feeling, letting it breathe without immediately trying to fix it or move past it, can feel like failure. It isn't. It's often the most honest thing a person can do. There's a concept in psychology called integration, the process by which experiences that have been pushed away, denied, or compartmentalized slowly find their way back into the whole of who you are. Not to define you, not to drag you back, but to stop consuming so much energy in their containment. Because that's what unprocessed experience does. It doesn't disappear. It sits behind the door you've been working so hard to keep shut. And it costs you, not all at once, but in a constant slow drain. In the fatigue you can't explain. In the irritability that comes from nowhere. In the way certain conversations, certain rooms, certain small moments of ordinary success make you want to disappear. Integration doesn't mean making peace with injustice. It doesn't mean forgiving the systems or the people that failed you. It means reclaiming the parts of yourself that got left behind in survival mode. The part that was curious before it learned that curiosity was a luxury. The part that wanted before it learned that wanting led to disappointment. The part that felt deeply and without apology before it learned that feeling too much was dangerous. Those parts didn't die. They went underground. And the work of integration is, in some ways, the work of going down to find them. This isn't a comfortable process. Anyone who tells you it is hasn't done it. There's a reason people carry their adaptations for decades. Because the alternative, at least at first, feels worse. Touching the old pain, even in the service of releasing it, requires a kind of willingness that doesn't come without cost. It asks you to be with yourself in a way that the world rarely modeled for you, to offer yourself the patience and compassion that perhaps no one ever offered you when you needed it most. And here is the thing about compassion for yourself that gets misunderstood. It is not softness. It is not an excuse to stop trying or to lower the standard. Genuine self-compassion, the kind that researchers like Kristen Neff have spent careers studying, is actually correlated with greater resilience, not less. People who can acknowledge their own suffering without drowning in it, who can hold their failures with some degree of warmth rather than contempt, are more likely to try again, more likely to reach out for help, more likely to believe, in a quiet but durable way, that change is possible. That belief, not in some abstract future, but in the possibility of today being slightly different than yesterday, is perhaps the most radical thing a person who has grown up in poverty can develop, because everything in that experience conspired to teach the opposite, that the future is not meaningfully different from the past, that effort is not reliably rewarded, that hope is something other people have permission to hold. Reclaiming the capacity to hope is not delusional. It is an act of resistance. It is refusing to let the architecture of your early life be the final word on who you are capable of becoming. This is not a story that ends with a breakthrough, not with a single conversation or a video or a realization. The change we're talking about is the kind that happens incrementally, almost invisibly, in the ordinary moments when you choose, just barely, just enough, to be on your own side. When you catch the voice that says you don't deserve this, and you pause before agreeing. When you let yourself want something without immediately finding a reason it won't happen. When you let someone see you, really see you, without immediately bracing for what they'll do with what they find. Those moments accumulate, slowly. They don't announce themselves, but over time, the story shifts. Not all at once, not cleanly, but it shifts, and that shift, quiet, unglamorous, and profoundly human, is where freedom actually begins.